Shut up. Paying my bills doesn't make you my real father. My stepdaughter said this at evening dinner when we were planning her wedding. I was shocked to the bone because this was someone I took as my own daughter since she was 3 years old. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you how everything unfolded. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Sam Allen from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I remember the first time she held my hand. She was 3 years old, tiny fingers curled around mine like I was her entire world. Her cheeks were sticky with apple juice, and she had this wide-eyed wonder that made me want to protect her from everything ugly in life. I wasn't her biological father, never claimed to be, but from that day, I took on the role without hesitation. Her real dad was barely around, some flaky shadow who popped in and out when it suited him, while I was the one doing bedtime stories, school drop-offs, and midnight fever checks. I was the one who taught her to ride a bike, stood front row at every school recital, and learned how to braid hair because her mom couldn't get the part straight. I loved that girl fiercely. I never saw her as Step, she was just my daughter. Raising someone else's child isn't a job you clock into. It's a choice you make every single day. I paid for her braces, her private school tuition, her first car. I was the one who stayed up late researching colleges when she was too anxious to apply. When she got into her dream university, it was my shoulders she cried on out of disbelief and joy. I never held back. I gave her everything I would have given my own blood because I truly believed love was enough to close the gap between biology and belonging. Her mom and I didn't have children of our own, and honestly, I didn't feel the need to. I already had her. She used to call me Dad, so naturally, so often, I sometimes forgot she hadn't been mine from birth. That illusion, no, that bond. I thought it was real. I thought it meant something. So when she told me she was getting married, I jumped into planning mode like any father would. I offered to cover the entire wedding, venue, catering, dress, everything. Her fiancé was working under me in my company, so it felt all the more like family coming together. I was proud. Nervous, sure, but proud. I remember sitting at the dining table that evening, all of us laughing, passing around plates of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, talking about floral arrangements and seating charts. That moment felt whole. It felt earned. And then, like a record scratch across soft music, she snapped. Shut up. Paying my bills doesn't make you my real father. I swear, time slowed. The fork I was holding stopped halfway to my mouth. Her mother's face drained of color, and her fiancé looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. But me? I sat there stunned, absolutely frozen. My mind didn't know how to process those words, not from her, not after everything. I tried to blink it away, like maybe I'd misheard. Maybe she was joking, lashing out over something stupid like the napkin color or a misplaced comment. But her face was hard, cold, even. She meant it. She said it like it had been sitting on her tongue for years, waiting for the right moment to detonate. I excused myself from the table. Quietly. No yelling, no slamming plates. I just walked upstairs, closed the door, and stared at the bedroom wall for a long time. My chest ached like someone had taken a hammer to it. I'd never felt betrayal like that. Not from someone I raised. Not from someone I called my child. I thought about every moment, every dollar, every sleepless night. And how none of it seemed to matter in her eyes. She reduced me to a wallet. She stripped me of every memory we'd shared and threw it in my face like I was nothing more than a man her mother married. The next morning, I made 2 decisions before I even brushed my teeth. First, I called the wedding vendors and canceled every contract I'd signed. I told them to bill me for the deposits lost, but not a dime more. Then I went to the office, called her fiancé into my office, and fired him. No drama, no scene. I just handed him the termination letter and told him I didn't want my personal life tangled in my professional one anymore. He didn't protest. In fact, he looked like he'd expected it. That stung, too. Had they both seen me as a stepping stone all along? When I came home, my wife was waiting. She was livid. She called me cruel, said I was ruining our daughter's future, that I was being childish. I stared at her while she hurled those words, and all I could think was, our daughter? You mean the one who said I was nothing to her? I didn't say it aloud. I didn't have the energy. But in that moment, something broke between us two. A crack, subtle but irreversible. Because if she couldn't see the hurt in my eyes, if she couldn't understand what it felt like to be discarded after 20 years of fatherhood, then maybe she never really saw me either. I slept in the guest room that night. My phone buzzed a few times, messages from family members who'd clearly been pulled into the chaos. I didn't respond. I didn't want anyone's opinion. I didn't want anyone trying to smooth things over. For once in my life, I wasn't interested in being the bigger person. I wasn't going to apologize for being hurt. Not this time. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a declaration. And I heard her loud and clear. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling fan slicing through the darkness, each slow rotation echoing my thoughts back at me. I kept going over her words. Doesn't make you my real father. It wasn't just the disrespect that got me. It was the casualness of it. The way she said it like it was some long-held truth, like I should have known my place all along. All those memories. Birthday parties I planned down to the last balloon, hospital bills I paid without blinking, late-night calls from college when she had a breakdown. I realized she must have filed them away as charity, not love. I was a placeholder, a convenient benefactor, a man to fill the gap until she no longer needed filling. By sunrise, I'd already called the caterer and photographer, then the florist. I didn't even flinch when they told me I'd lose half the deposits. I told them to send the invoices and consider the rest canceled. The last call I made was to the jeweler. We had ordered the wedding bands through a family friend. I told him to melt them down, donate the scrap value to charity. I didn't care where the money went anymore. The wedding was off, at least as far as I was concerned. Whatever my stepdaughter and her fiancé planned after that was on them. My investment, and every cent, was done. When I showed up to work that morning, I called Mark, her fiancé, into my office. He shuffled in, not meeting my eye, and sat down like he already knew what was coming. I didn't drag it out. You're terminated effective immediately, I said, handing him the letter. Your severance will be processed by payroll by the end of the week. He barely blinked, just nodded, stood up, and walked out without a word. No protest, no explanation. And that silence told me more than any excuse ever could. He'd never respected me either. Maybe she talked about me at home. Maybe he'd heard her diminish me for years. Maybe he thought I was too weak or too desperate for love to ever push back. I sat in that office long after he left, watching the sunlight crawl across the hardwood floor. I wasn't angry, not the fire-breathing kind. I was something colder, something older. I was tired of loving people who saw me as optional, tired of carrying this invisible weight no one else seemed to notice. My whole life, I tried to be the reliable one, the one who shows up, pays the bills, holds the line. And now, when I'd finally had enough, the world wanted to act like I was the one who broke it. When I got home that night, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. My wife was in the kitchen, banging pots around like I'd killed someone. She didn't speak at first, just glared at me over the open fridge door. Then she finally said, "You're really doing this?" I didn't answer right away. I pulled a beer from the fridge, twisted the cap off, and sat at the kitchen island. She said I'm not her real father. I'm just treating her accordingly. She was upset. She snapped. You embarrassed her at dinner. You always push too hard. I was paying for her wedding. I interrupted, more sharply than I meant to. I wasn't asking her to sacrifice a kidney. I was helping. You're punishing her, she said, folding her arms. And you fired her fiancé. What kind of message does that send? That I'm done being disrespected in my own house, I said. My voice wasn't raised, but it had weight. It had finality. She doesn't get to take my money, my time, my love, and then tell me I'm not real. She made that choice. Now I'm making mine. She didn't say anything for a long time. Just stood there, blinking, like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. And maybe she didn't. Maybe she'd gotten so used to me swallowing my pride, smoothing things over, playing the peacemaker. But that man was gone. He died the moment his daughter looked him in the eye and told him he didn't count. That night, she slept in our bedroom, and I stayed in the guest room again. The silence between us stretched like a rubber band, ready to snap. I knew we were headed towards something ugly, maybe even an end, but I couldn't make myself care enough to stop it. I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. For the first time in years, I was putting myself first. The following days were a blur of angry phone calls and awkward silence. Her relatives called to scold me, uncles, cousins, even her grandmother. One of them had the audacity to say, "You should know better, she's just a kid." A kid? At 24? A kid doesn't plan a wedding. A kid doesn't co-sign a mortgage. She wasn't a child, she was a grown woman who decided her version of adulthood meant cutting me out of the picture. So I helped her finish the job. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she and Mark were trying to reschedule the wedding, trimming it down, paying for it themselves. I didn't reach out, didn't offer advice, didn't warn them about the pitfalls I knew they'd face. Let them learn. Let them stumble. I had done my part. I'd carried them long enough. It was their turn to figure it out. One night, maybe a week later, I came home to find my wife packing a suitcase. She said she needed space, that she was going to stay with our daughter for a while. I didn't argue. I helped her zip the bag. I even carried it to the car. I kissed her forehead and said, "Take all the time you need." When she pulled out of the driveway, I stood there in the dark, watching the taillights disappear. I wasn't sure if she'd come back. And to my own surprise, I wasn't sure if I wanted her to. Because I was starting to realize something no one had ever told me before. Sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, being good isn't enough. Sometimes, no matter how much you give, people will still decide you're not enough. And when that happens, the only thing left to do is walk away before they take what little dignity you have left. The house was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt deserted. Each creak of the floorboards echoed louder than it should have, and I found myself leaving the TV on at night just to fill the silence. My wife had been gone for a week, maybe more. I'd stopped counting. She didn't text. I didn't call. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been screamed in silence. And if I was being honest, a part of me welcomed the emptiness. No second-guessing my words. No wondering if I was walking on eggshells in my own damn home. Just quiet. Cold, yes, but clean. I kept up my routine. Work, gym, sleep, but something in me had shifted. I wasn't smiling at the guys in the break room. I wasn't making weekend plans or asking about their kids. I stopped showing up early and started leaving on time. That fire I'd always had, the sense of responsibility that made me give more than I got, it had flickered. Not out, but lower. I didn't want to be anyone's foundation anymore. Not when I'd been cracked through the center and no one bothered to patch it. Everyone always says stepfathers are heroes, but no one sticks around to see what happens when the mask falls off and the hero gets tired. I started revisiting old memories, not because I missed them, but because I was trying to figure out where it all went wrong. There was a photo in my office, her 6th grade graduation. She was standing in front of me, arms wrapped around my waist, grinning with that goofy, gap-toothed smile. I'd taken the day off work just to surprise her. She'd run across the parking lot yelling "Daddy," like I was the best part of her world. What happened to that little girl? When did she learn to fake it? Or worse, had I been the only one who believed it was real? One night, after a few drinks, I pulled up her old social media posts. Maybe I was looking for reassurance, something to prove I hadn't imagined it all. I found birthday posts where she thanked me for being the best dad anyone could ask for, Father's Day captions with long-winded love letters. But then I kept scrolling. More recent stuff. A podcast she'd been on with a friend, a casual conversation, half an hour of laughing and talking about growing up in a non-traditional home. And then I heard it. Her exact words. "I always felt like I was living with my mom's husband, not my dad. I mean, he tried, but it always felt performative, you know." I stared at the screen, my hand frozen on the mouse. Performative? Was she saying I was faking it? That all those years of showing up, cheering her on, supporting her dreams, were some kind of act? That I was pretending? The hurt came fast and sharp, like someone had reached inside and twisted my insides into a knot. I wasn't looking for gratitude, but I sure as hell wasn't expecting erasure. It hit me then. This wasn't a sudden outburst. Her comment at the dinner table hadn't come from nowhere. It had been building. She'd been rewriting history, maybe even in her own mind, slowly stripping away the love I gave her and replacing it with a version that made her feel more independent, more justified. Maybe she needed to believe I wasn't real so she could stand on her own. Maybe loving me was inconvenient to the story she wanted to tell about her life. That was when I knew I had to draw the line. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. I wasn't going to fight for a place in someone's life if they were actively writing me out. That night, I sat down with a yellow legal pad and wrote out a list. At the top, I wrote, "What I will no longer accept." I didn't even know what I planned to do with it. But it felt like a declaration, even if no one else ever read it. The list started small: disrespect in my home, being used for money, and by the end, I'd written, being someone's emotional punching bag while they wear a victim badge. A few days later, my wife called. Her voice was clipped, formal. She asked if she could come by and pick up some clothes. I told her I'd leave them in a bag by the front door. She didn't argue. We both knew she didn't want to see me. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I watched from the window as she pulled up, popped the trunk, grabbed the bag, and drove away without even looking at the house. I didn't wave. Neither did she. That weekend, I got a call from one of our mutual friends, Karen, who said she'd heard things and wanted to check on me. I told her I was fine. She hesitated, then said, "I just want you to know, not everyone sees it their way. You were always there for her, for both of them. Some of us noticed, even if they didn't." I didn't cry, but my throat tightened. It was the first time someone had acknowledged me without following it up with advice or shame. Just a small sliver of truth in a sea of judgment. After that, I started saying it out loud when I was alone. I was a good father. I did everything I could. It's okay to let go. Like a mantra, a reminder. Because guilt has a way of creeping in, especially when love was once real. But love, I was learning, doesn't guarantee loyalty. And loyalty, when it's one-sided, becomes servitude. The house was still quiet, but the silence didn't haunt me anymore. It felt like space, like breathing room. I didn't know what would come next, if my marriage would survive, if my stepdaughter would ever apologize. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity: I would never again pour myself into people who left me empty. I didn't plan the confrontation. It wasn't some carefully orchestrated showdown where I practiced speeches in the mirror. It happened the way real things do: messy, inconvenient, and charged with too many years of unsaid things. My wife texted one afternoon, "We need to talk. She wants to see you." At first, I stared at the message like it was a trap. I could feel my heart crawling into my throat, that old reflex of wanting to fix things rising up before I shoved it back down. I didn't respond right away. I paced my office, stared out the window, wondered what could possibly be said now that hadn't already been torn to pieces. Still, I told her to come by. Saturday, 2 p.m. neutral ground. No yelling, no theatrics. Just the three of us at the kitchen table, where it had all fallen apart in the first place. I spent the whole morning cleaning, even though I knew it was pointless. They weren't coming to admire my countertops. They were coming to confront the man who'd stepped back after 20 years of stepping in. When they arrived, I didn't open the door right away. I watched them through the peephole like a stranger. My wife looked older than I remembered, tired around the eyes, lips drawn tight. And my stepdaughter? She looked nervous. She wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy, like maybe they'd hide whatever guilt or pride she hadn't figured out what to do with yet. When I finally opened the door, I didn't offer a hug. I just stepped aside and let them in. The silence was unbearable. We sat across from each other, the dining table between us like a battleground. My wife cleared her throat first. "We appreciate you letting us come." I nodded once. No warmth, but no ice either. Just presence. My stepdaughter was the one who spoke next. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what I said. It came out wrong. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded. It didn't come out wrong. It came out exactly how you meant it. Her head dipped, and I saw the flicker of something shame, maybe. I was angry and overwhelmed. The wedding was a lot, and you were being overbearing. Overbearing. I repeated. "You mean involved? You mean offering to pay for everything? To support you like I've done your whole life?" She bit her lip, but her eyes met mine. It just felt like too much. "Like you were trying to control everything." I laughed once, a short bitter sound. "Control? I handed you a platinum card and said plan your dream day. I stayed out of every decision unless you asked. You think that's control? You made me feel like I owed you something," she blurted. "Like if you paid, I had to keep pretending like you were my real dad." There it was. The truth. Naked. Unapologetic. And yet, it landed like ice water down my spine. I never asked you to pretend, I said quietly. Everything I did because I loved you. Because I thought we were past the pretending. I didn't realize you were still measuring my worth in blood ties. My wife reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. Do you know what it's like? I continued, voice trembling now, to raise a child from toddler to adult, to sacrifice, to show up, to be the one who stays, and still be seen as the extra? The placeholder? No, my stepdaughter said, barely above a whisper. I don't. I didn't know how to navigate all of it. I had two dads, and you had one, I snapped. You had one who showed up, and one who disappeared every time the wind changed direction. Don't insult me by comparing us. The silence that followed was thick, and for the first time, I saw her cry. Not loud, not theatrical. Just two tears rolling down her cheeks that she didn't bother to wipe away. I was confused, she said. I felt torn, and I didn't know how to tell you that I needed space without sounding ungrateful. You didn't sound ungrateful, I said. You sounded cruel. There's a difference. My wife finally spoke again, her voice trembling. I should have stepped in sooner. I should have helped you both communicate. I was scared of being caught in the middle. I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the woman I'd built a life with. Not the mother defending her child, but the partner who once promised to be my teammate. You were always in the middle, I said, but you chose a side when you walked out. She closed her eyes. I know. I stood then, not to leave, but to breathe. I walked to the kitchen sink, poured a glass of water, stared out the window at the yard I used to mow while dreaming of grandkids playing out there. Here's the thing, I said, turning back to face them. You don't have to call me Dad. You don't have to honor me, or include me, or even like me. But you will respect what I gave. You will acknowledge the man who raised you. And if you can't do that, then there's nothing left to talk about. She stood too, and for a moment, I thought she might reach for me. But she didn't. She just nodded, wiping her face. I hear you, she said. My wife stayed behind a moment longer. What happens now? She asked. I looked at her, feeling every year of our marriage hanging in the balance. That depends on whether you still see me as a man you love, or just the man who raised your daughter. She didn't answer, and that was answer enough. She didn't come home that night. My wife, after the confrontation, she said she needed to think, and I didn't stop her. I didn't chase or plead or promise to change. I just stood in the doorway as she walked to her car, the wind catching the hem of her coat, and I wondered if I'd ever see her walk back through that door again. I didn't cry. There was a kind of grief in me. Yes, but it wasn't fresh. It had been brewing for weeks, maybe longer. Grief doesn't always come when someone leaves. Sometimes it arrives while they're still in the room, already halfway gone in spirit. And sometimes, when they finally walk out, it's just confirmation of what you already knew, that they'd left long before their keys hit the ignition. The next few days were strangely calm. There were no more tense dinners, no eggshell conversations, no background noise of someone else's footsteps echoing down the hall. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner for one and let the house hum in its emptiness. It wasn't peace, exactly, but it was clarity. And in that clarity, I began to see the contours of my life without them, not in a bitter way, but in a grounded, sobering one. The house felt bigger. My time felt like mine again. I was no longer orbiting around someone else's moods or schedules or unspoken expectations. People started talking. Of course they did. Families always talk, especially when one of their own breaks from the script. Some were careful, polite texts and vague check-ins. Others were less subtle. My wife's sister called and told me I was being prideful, that family meant forgiveness, not ultimatums. I listened quietly, thanked her for her opinion, and hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. The truth is, forgiveness had never been off the table. What was off the table was forgetting. Forgetting how I was treated. Forgetting the years of silent resentment building under the surface while I was out there believing I was part of something real. Forgetting how easy it was for them to rewrite the story without me in it. Word got around that the wedding had officially been downsized. A courthouse ceremony. Just immediate family and a modest dinner at some local restaurant. Mark, her fiancé, ex-employee now, had apparently picked up some temp work through a buddy. My stepdaughter had taken on a second job to help cover costs. And while part of me knew they were struggling, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt nothing. Or maybe something quieter than revenge. Something like detachment. It was never about the money for me. It was about being treated like a stranger after 20 years of standing in as a father. And if losing my support made her life harder, then maybe that was the price of clarity. She sent me a letter a week before the wedding. A real, handwritten letter in that slanted, neat handwriting she used to practice in middle school. No apology. Just an explanation. She said she was trying to find her voice and didn't know how to do that while still clinging to mine. She said she appreciated all I'd done, that she didn't regret the life we'd shared, but that she needed to redefine what family meant to her now that she was starting one of her own. I read the letter twice, then folded it and slid it into a drawer I hadn't opened in months. I didn't write back. I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me. I thought I would carry the bitterness like a shield. But after the confrontation, after the house emptied and the noise faded, all I felt was tired. And not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. It was deeper, a kind of soul fatigue. Like I had been giving and never once paused to check if there was anything left in me to give. I'd made myself into a bridge between worlds. Father and not father, husband and outsider, provider and second choice. And now that I'd stopped holding the weight, I was finally starting to feel the bruises it left behind. One night, about a month later, my wife came back, not with luggage or keys, just herself. She stood in the doorway, her hands clasped tightly, like she wasn't sure what role to play anymore. "I'm not here to move back," she said softly. "I just needed to see you." I didn't ask why. I just nodded toward the chair across from mine at the kitchen table, and we sat in silence for a while. She looked around like everything was both familiar and foreign. Finally, she said, "She's married now." "I know," I said. "She misses you," she added, though her voice faltered. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to say what I was really thinking, that missing me wasn't the same as valuing me, that regret didn't erase the damage done. "I miss you too," she said, quieter now. That stung more than I expected. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't the enemy. She never had been. But she'd made choices. She'd stood silently while I was erased. And now, she wanted the comfort of what we had without reckoning with what it cost me. "I don't know if I can go back," I finally said. She nodded, eyes glossy. "I understand." And that was it. She left not long after, and this time I didn't watch from the window. I just sat at the table and let the silence settle again, not as punishment, but as clarity. I didn't need a grand gesture. I didn't need a reunion. What I needed was space to rebuild what they'd broken in me. Alone, if necessary. I didn't attend the wedding. The invitation never came, but even if it had, I would have sent it straight back, unopened. That chapter of my life, whatever it had been, was closed. I heard about it afterward through mutual contacts. A small ceremony at the courthouse, followed by dinner at a chain restaurant they used to like in college. Her mother went, of course, along with a handful of close friends. No fanfare. No photographers. No speeches. No me. And that was how it had to be. Not out of spite, but because showing up would have made me a liar. I couldn't pretend to be part of something I was cut out of the moment she decided biology trumped bond. For the first time in 2 decades, I started to think about what I wanted. Not what I could provide. Not how I could be useful. But what I actually needed from the people in my life. And more than anything, I needed to be seen. Not just for what I did, but for who I was. Not as the guy who kept the lights on and the fridge full. Not as the man who stepped in where another had stepped out, but as a human being, capable of being hurt, deserving of being heard. And once I realized that, everything else shifted. The weight I'd carried, the constant negotiation of self-worth in a family that never quite claimed me, it began to lift. I didn't speak to her again. Months passed, then a year. Birthdays came and went. Holidays, too. There was no message, no thinking of you text. She moved forward, and so did I, but in different directions. I heard she started working full-time at some local nonprofit, something about youth services. Maybe she was trying to be a different kind of adult. Maybe marriage softened some of her sharper edges. I didn't know. I didn't ask. I'd made my peace with the silence. I kept the letter she wrote me, the one she sent before the wedding. It sat in the same drawer, folded neatly, yellowing at the corners. Some nights, I'd take it out and read it again, not to analyze or dissect, but to remember. Not her, but me. The version of me who once believed that love alone could guarantee belonging. The man who had to learn, too late, but still in time. That family isn't just who you raise. It's who chooses you back. One day, out of nowhere, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small wooden frame with a photo I hadn't seen in years, me and her, at her high school graduation, arms around each other, both of us beaming like we had everything in the world figured out. Tucked behind the frame was a note, short and shaky. I didn't know how to say thank you then. I do now. I stared at it for a long time. That picture, that handwriting, that too late gratitude. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt still. Like I was standing in a clearing after a long storm. It didn't undo the past. It didn't rebuild the bridge. But it acknowledged the wreckage, and sometimes that's the most you can ask for. I placed the photo on my bookshelf, not front and center, but not hidden either. It wasn't a shrine. It was a marker, a reminder of who I'd been and what I'd survived. My wife and I never got divorced, but we never fully came back together either. We kept in touch, shared the occasional dinner, but the rhythm had changed. The trust, once stretched thin between loyalty to me and loyalty to her daughter, had frayed. We both knew it. And maybe that's what maturity looks like sometimes, not reconciliation, but respectful distance. Not hatred, but history. We've been a family. And then we weren't. No villains. Just choices. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, cutting her off, walking away from the wedding, firing the fiancé. And I always tell them the truth. No, not for a second. Because the worst thing you can do to yourself is stay somewhere you're constantly made to prove your worth. I did my part. More than my part. And in the end, they showed me who they really saw when they looked at me. It wasn't a father. It wasn't a partner. It was a placeholder, useful, dependable, and ultimately disposable. That's why I stood my ground. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Because love that requires you to shrink yourself isn't love. It's servitude. And I'm not built to serve people who mistake silence for peace. So here I am, still in the same house, still running the company, still the same man, but less hollow now. I've learned how to draw lines without guilt, how to let go without shame. I've started traveling more, picked up hobbies I once put on hold, golf, cooking, even woodworking. Turns out I'm decent with my hands when I'm not using them to catch someone else every time they fall. Some nights, I sit out on the porch and think about how easily one sentence can unravel years of love. And then I remind myself that the unraveling didn't start that night at dinner. It started the moment I began believing that being everything to someone guaranteed they'd see me the same way. That was my mistake, but it was also my lesson. In the end, I'll always know what I was to her, even if she didn't say it until it was too late. And maybe that's enough. Maybe being the kind of man who showed up, who stood firm, who walked away not out of hatred, but out of dignity. That's the name I get to carry. Not dad, but something harder to define. Something earned. A name etched in silence. If this story moved you or reminded you of your own experiences with family, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories that dig deep into the heart of emotional conflict and personal growth. Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear how you would have handled a moment like this. See you soon in the next story.